Thank you, Jemima. How are we all, everyone? Good. I feel like people have had busy weekends this week, so there's a lot of tired faces in the room. So we'll try and keep this short and snappy. Hopefully everyone will stay with me. But in case I've not had the pleasure of meeting you, my name is Becky, as Jemima said. Also go as Bex, Rebecca, whatever you want, really. I'm part of the OH1 leadership team, and I've been in Loughborough since 2015 and part of Open Heaven since 2016, so quite a long time now. And this weekend, I moved into my 7th house in Loughborough, so yep. In case you, like the smart people in the room, probably done the maths. That means the longest I've stayed in a house is 2 years in Loughborough. So I do like to move around and change things up a little bit. So as Jemima said, we are going to be looking at faith in uncertainty today. And we're going to be doing that by looking at the story of Noah, specifically Noah and the ark, or Noah and the large boat, depending on the version of the Bible that you're reading. And this is quite a well-known story, isn't it? I feel like even if you've maybe never been to church or opened up a Bible, you may have come across this story before, because it's one of those ones that's been adapted into like big Hollywood movies. There's lots of kids' songs and stories about it. So people may have come across it before, but one of the issues with these kind of big popular stories is that sometimes we reduce it down to the big events and sometimes miss out some of those like key details in between that make it a really, really interesting and powerful story. So I think sometimes when we kind of relay the story of Noah and the ark, it can go a little something like this. We can say, God told Noah to build an ark. Noah built the ark. God sent a flood, which killed the majority of living creatures. But it was all okay because the animals walked in 2 by 2, and then there was a dove and a branch and a rainbow in the sky, and everyone lived happily ever after. And it's like, hang on a sec, like let's just backtrack a little bit. And let's just kind of take a moment to look at those little bits that happened in between. It's not just an entertaining story, but a story about struggle and sacrifice and obedience and faith. And so it's really interesting. In Hebrews 11, it says, it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. So we're going to look at this in a bit more depth today. And to start off with, I'm going to get Jess to come up and read the account of Noah from Genesis. So if you want to follow along, she is reading from Genesis 6, verse 5 to Genesis 7, verse 12. So it's quite a long chunk, so strap in, everyone. Unfortunately, I didn't put it on the slide, so there are Bibles at the back if you want to follow along as well.
I feel like you're all going to get bored of my voice reading the Bible this series. Thank you so much. Okay, Genesis 6, starting at verse 5. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. And the Lord says, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on earth was corrupt. So God said to Noah, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth. Build a large boat from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar inside and out. Then construct decks and stalls throughout its interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around the boat. Put the door on the side and build 3 decks inside the boat, lower, middle, and upper. Look, I am about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird and every kind of animal and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and a female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created." So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. He went on board the boat to escape the flood, he and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky.
Let's give Jess a round of applause, because that was a slog. Well done. Amazing. So yeah, as you've probably gathered, we're not going to kind of go through the whole story today just because of time. But I got Jess to start off where she did at verse 5 in Genesis 6, because I think it's important that we kind of understand some of the context and background and understand why this flood had to take place. So it says that the Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil, and it broke his heart. So the people on the earth were mistreating each other, taking advantage of one another, and ultimately not treating each other as God's image bearers. And as I was kind of reading this, it reminded me of something that I spoke about in a talk that I did on Palm Sunday a few months ago. And if you remember, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey as a kind of leader, as a king. And then he goes to the temple, and when he arrives there, he sees that they've turned the temple into this marketplace, and there's people mistreating each other, cheating each other out of their money, and just, not treating each other as they should be. And Jesus gets angry, but it's this kind of anger that comes when you're kind of brokenhearted, like he's really upset. And so something radical had to happen to reconcile the people with God. And a few days later, that radical event happens when Jesus dies on the cross, taking on the sins of the world and making a way for people to be in a right relationship with God again. And I think there are some similarities to what is happening here. A few things we can, like some parallels we can draw on. So the people are treating each other very badly in Genesis. And if you read the previous few chapters, you'll see stories where there's division between brothers. There's increased division between humanity and the ground that they're trying to work. And there's a lot of vengeance. And so to bring order to the world and create a way for God's people to be in right relationship with him, something radical had to happen. So this kind of reset moment when God removes the evil and the wickedness from the world and covers it in water. And this also has parallels to the creation story as well. In Genesis 1, verse 2, it says, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. So it's almost like there's this reset moment where the world returns to this state that it's previously been in. And if I'm honest, I find this really harsh, and I still find it quite confusing. But one thing that I do understand, because we've spoken about it a lot in Open Heaven this year, is that when a plant gets a disease in one of its branches, the best thing to do to ensure that that plant survives is to cut off that branch that has a disease to make sure it doesn't spread and it preserves that bit of the plant that is still good. And it is harsh, but by doing that, you ensure that that plant can continue to grow and thrive for many years to come. And I think that's similar to what is happening here with the flood. Not every living thing was destroyed. God preserved this kind of creation mini in the form of a large boat. This little seed that had been protected and has the potential to grow. And that's where Noah comes in. So let's take a little look at this man of faith a bit more closely. And to do that, I'm going to need some volunteers for this talk. So some of you may have noticed my bag of goodies. I'm going to need 5 volunteers, and a pre-warning, you're going to be stood up here for a while. So if you are an avid note taker, you might not want to do this. And you are possibly going to have to wear something, so don't come up if you don't want to look like a fool. But if I could have 5 volunteers come up, that would be lovely. Go on, Jemima. You can just walk up. You don't have to be selected. It's not like the Rounders team. Great. We've got 4. One more? Great. Thanks, Rowan. Awesome. With everyone talking about themselves. Awesome. So the plan for today is we are going to go and do like a little timeline of this story and go through step by step and kind of look at what maybe Noah was thinking and feeling. I just looked at Rowan. That's not how I envisaged it. But we'll go with it. We'll go with it. Cool. So do you guys want to spread out? And I'm going to come along with you and immerse myself in the story. Lovely. I'm not going to mess anything up audio-wise, am I? That'll be fine. Cool. So we are going to start down here. And in case this isn't obvious, this is like a mask like a robber would wear. Like if you're an evil person, you might wear a mask like this, yeah. If you can't tell, I wasn't allowed to take GCSE art because I'm not very good at it, but I tried my best. So, as we've just spoken about, the world was quite an evil place. It was full of wickedness. But then we have Noah. He was living a different kind of life. It says that Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. So he kind of lives in stark contrast to the surroundings that he's in. And it says that he was the only blameless person on earth, which means he must have had pretty good character. He walked in close relationship with God. So he was in tune with God and his ways. And he was letting the time that he spent with God shape the way that he lived his life and the way that he treated other people. So God entrusted the preservation of his creation to Noah. And in order to do that, he needed to give Noah some instructions. And Noah had to be listening with big ears, which is where Jack comes in. So, yeah, you better remember all this, guys. Putting a lot of effort.
Must be an elephant. I thought it was an elephant.
Oh, no, sorry. These are just enlarged human ears. So, you pipe down. So, God gives instructions to Noah. So, I forgot about the slides as well. Are you good? Awesome, thank you, sorry. So the next stage of the story is all about when God gives Noah the lowdown on what he's going to do and gives some really detailed instructions on how to build this ark. And it doesn't say specifically how God speaks to Noah, but in the Old Testament, there's loads of examples of the way that God speaks to his people. So, for example, in Samuel is woken up by God speaking to him, this kind of audible voice. That must have been pretty loud if it woke him up from his sleep. And then there's other examples, like in 1 Kings, where God speaks to Elijah through a whisper. And then there's other examples where it's maybe not a voice, but God's communicating something, like to Joseph when he is giving Joseph dreams to kind of communicate something that's going to happen. So God speaks to people in a variety of ways. And it says that Noah walked in close relationship with God. So he was probably quite familiar with God's voice in whatever form that came to him. He must have recognized it when he was getting all of these instructions. So a question for us to pause on for a moment is, how well do we know God's voice? How well can we understand him? Can we kind of recognize the ways that God speaks to us? I know that for me, one of the ways that God often speaks to me is through music and through song lyrics. Like ever since I was very, very little, whether it be Christian music, non-Christian music, I've always found that that's been a really beautiful time. And some of the most timely and important things that God has communicated to me has been through music. So yeah, maybe you've got something similar, a kind of go-to way. But if you're sat there thinking, I don't think I do know God's voice, or I haven't heard God speaking in a while, I just want to remind you of a little book called the Bible, which is also called the Word of God sometimes. And I purposely left this example out earlier for dramatic effect. We're making this point, but there are examples of when God speaks to people through his written word in the Old Testament as well. So, for example, there's a guy called Nehemiah who sets out to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and he sits down with a guy called Ezra, a prophet, and they do this kind of deep dive into the book of the law. And when they do that, they find that there's these instructions that God had given to his people through Moses about some certain things that they should be doing during this festival that they're having. And so they read this and they're like, oh, like, we didn't know this. We should probably do that. And they do follow these instructions for a while, and things are going really well. And unfortunately, because, humans have a tendency to do this, they kind of get sidetracked and stop doing it, and things go south again pretty quickly. But that is a good example of how God spoke to people through his written word back then, and he continues to do so today. So you always have access to the word of God. And if you are in maybe a season where you're feeling a bit angry, maybe you're going through some grief, you're feeling lonely, whatever it may be, it could be happy feelings as well. We're not all sad. But I can guarantee, and I encourage you to open the Bible and see what it has in store for you. So let's just get back to Noah for a moment. So it doesn't say specifically how Noah was feeling as he was hearing these instructions and hearing these plans from God. Did he just think, oh yeah, sure, okay, I'll do that, yeah? Or was he upset? Did he plead with God? Did he have questions? Was it more like a two-way conversation? We don't know. But let's be honest, what God was telling Noah was pretty wild, and it would be understandable for him to have a big reaction. Just last week, Els was telling us about how when God told Sarah she was going to have a baby in her old age, her reaction was to laugh because it just sounded so ridiculous, so unbelievable. So maybe he had a similar reaction as well. We don't know. But what we do know is that he did obey God's command. We don't know whether he went ready and willing or slowly and reluctantly, but we do know that he went. Noah trusted God enough to say, I may not understand everything, and I've never seen anything like this happen before, but I'm willing to partner with you in this. And that's probably a feeling that feels more relatable to us in this room. I'm not aware that any of us have been told to build a large boat, but many of us would have had other instructions or prompts from God. They don't have to be big. It could have been, go speak to that person over there, or go pray for that person over there. But every time we say yes, we are partnering with God and putting our faith in him, despite not knowing what's going to happen, despite the uncertainty. So Noah says yes to God, which brings us to the next point. I'm just going to shimmy along here. So the next point is that Noah obeys the command and begins building the ark. So he's a very conscientious builder. He's got his hat on. And so it says in Genesis 6, verse 22, so Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. And this sentence is wild to me. Like, this short sentence, this 10-word sentence, makes what Noah did seem super, super simple. And I can't quite wrap my head around it, because he was being asked to build this boat that was like over 100 meters long. And this sentence just makes it sound like, yeah, he just did it. And yeah, I can't relate to that. And that's partly because I feel like, well, in some ways I can relate to it, because I had a construction dream once too. And yeah, I don't know why you're laughing, because I can have dreams. So anyway, I managed to procure some wooden pallets, and I was just a little girl with a big dream of making these pallets into like an outdoor table for my house. And similarly to Noah, I didn't have any power tools. And I'd kind of romanticized this idea of like making it just by hand and like doing it how they did in the good old days. And when I say I had help. I had a lot of help. But there's a photo, actually. So you can see what was going on. So that was the pallet. And then you can see what was happening. Like, we managed to get it fairly even. So it's pretty good. But the problem with doing things by hand is it takes a really long time. And quite frankly, I lost all motivation for this project. So do you want to go on to the next photo? Yeah. This is how that project ended. It's quite sad. I have no words really. It's just like watching your hopes and dreams burn alive. But anyway, so that's why I feel like I can relate to Noah a little bit, because what he was doing was very, very hard. And if I can't complete a small project like that, I can't imagine how hard it was to build a boat on that scale. And not only did it just have to kind of look good, it had to hold all these animals and be watertight. Like, it had to function. He couldn't just do a half-hearted job. So again, I wonder what Noah was feeling through all of this. One thing I'm pretty certain of is that he was probably feeling quite physically tired and maybe had kind of blisters on his hands from the labor. There was a real physical toll to what he was doing. But I also wonder if there was an emotional toll as well. Were people watching him and laughing at him and judging him? Was he being ridiculed as he built this boat? And in preparation for this talk, I also felt it was important to watch Evan Almighty. It's a great film starring Steve Carell. I'll be honest, it's not very biblically accurate, but very entertaining. And it did throw up some interesting questions and thoughts for me, because there's some scenes in that movie where Steve, also Noah, he was kind of telling people that this flood was going to come and nobody believed him. And they all thought he'd kind of gone a little bit crazy. But it got me wondering, did the real Noah also try and tell his neighbours and his friends that this flood was going to come? And did Noah experience rejection and grief as he watched these people walk away and refuse to turn to God, knowing what was going to happen to them? So I think a huge amount of physical and emotional investment went into this project that must have taken a really, really long time. And through it all, I'm sure Noah probably experienced some wobbles as well. He probably had some days where he thought, I don't know if I can do this. Like, God, I know you told me to do this, but I don't know if I've got it in me. I'm finding this really, really hard. And maybe you can recall some times when you've felt the same thing. I know I definitely have. And I'm sure there's also across the room many testimonies of people who has persevered and trusted God through those really difficult times and come out the other side saying it was totally worth it and God was there all the time. And so if there are some stories like that coming to mind, just keep hold of them, because we're going to share some of those with each other in the response, because it's really lovely when people share stories like that to build up other people's faith and encourage one another. So do keep hold of those. So Noah perseveres through the build and the boat is completed, which brings us to the next point. So we have our lovely completed boat filled with sheep and giraffes and even a little Noah. Let's bring him up there. Let's pop him there. Great. So the work is completed, and once it is, God speaks to Noah again, telling him to load up the boat with his family and a pair of each type of animal. And he also gives specific instructions about when the rain is going to come. And just as before, Noah did exactly as everything God had commanded him to do. So now Noah is just kind of waiting for this fulfillment of, oh no, Noah. That's true. He was wearing his protective gear. So Noah is kind of waiting for this fulfillment now. He's waiting for the flood, but he wasn't kind of passively waiting. He had jobs to do. He had to get these animals into the boat, and he also had to get his family into the boat as well. Now, as far as we're aware, God didn't speak directly to Noah's family about what was going to happen, but they were directly impacted by these plans. And so now it's at this point that I wonder what they were thinking through all of this. Did they willingly get on the boat? Were they standing with him with as much faith as he had? Or were they a bit more hesitant? Were they having to be kind of dragged onto the boat reluctantly? A few weeks ago, Rach kind of led through this exercise on Hebrews 11, where we kind of read through it and picked out what kind of stood out to us. And one of the things that stood out to me was the number of other people who were impacted by the faithful actions of an individual. Take Moses, for example. He led the Israelites out of Egypt, and the steps of faith that he took impacted a whole people group and therefore the generations to come as well. So radical acts of obedience often impact other people. And there's a big responsibility that comes with that. Many people in this room will be leaders, whether that's in your workplace, in a church setting, maybe in your sports teams, whatever it might be. And the decisions that you make will have an impact on the people around you. So when God entrusted Noah to build this boat, he not only entrusted him to be a builder, but also to be a leader. He entrusted him to act faithfully and lead his people well. And he successfully managed to get them on the boat. And maybe in the same way that Noah may have been thinking, I don't really know everything that's going on here, but I know God's character and I know that he loves me, so I'm willing to put my faith in him. Maybe Noah's family was thinking a similar thing, where they thought, I don't fully understand what's going on here, but I know Noah's got a good character. I know he walks faithfully with God, and I know that he loves us and wants the best for us. So I'm willing to follow him into this boat. And that's why good character and integrity is important in leadership, because it's in those moments when you're leading people into uncertain territory, that's the thing that people will look out for. They'll look at your character, they'll look at your track record and say, okay, I'm willing to trust you in this. So Noah successfully leads his family and the animals into the boat, ensuring there were male and female pairs so that they could reproduce and continue populating the earth after the flood waters recede. And now they wait. And I imagine it was probably quite a nervous wait, probably quite a smelly wait, being cooped up in that boat altogether. But they are holding on to that faith that what God said was going to happen will come to pass. So, next we move on to the flood. Dramatic moment. Cue Abby. Da, 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 da. Wow, look at that, everyone. The rain is pouring from the skies. So the flood comes. And obviously the story continues beyond this. I mentioned the whole kind of dove and rainbow earlier. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that today. So we're just going to end here by acknowledging that the flood does come. This event that Noah has waited so long for finally happens. And again, we don't know what Noah was feeling, but I imagine it was a mixture of emotions. Maybe some relief, thinking it was all worth it. I did hear God right, I wasn't an idiot. Maybe it was grief, watching the world that he called home be covered and destroyed by these waters. And maybe it was some fear as well, more uncertainty, thinking, now what? Will I ever get off this boat? What will the world look like when the water goes? How are we going to survive this? So although all of these phases are complete, there's still more uncertainty to come. There's something new to be unsure about. Life is full of uncertainties. And that's the thing about faith. It's not like some module you can just tick off and say, yeah, I've done my kind of faithful act now. The reason we called this series Living by Faith is because it is a way of life. It's something that's needed in every season because it's always full of uncertainties. So in those moments, we need to put our faith in something we can be certain of. And that's how I think Noah was able to get through all of these events, because he walked closely with God, and so he was assured of the fact that God is just, and God is patient and loving and almighty and a promise keeper. He was the same God who started this project as the God who ended. He is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. So thank you so much, my lovely volunteers. Thank you. You can pop all of those, just put them down. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So, you don't have to clean up now. We can do that later. Okay, we're doing it anyway. So servant-hearted. Look at that. You can keep the ears, Jack. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So we're ending that timeline here, but before we close, I've spoken a lot about radical obedience and uncertainty, about walking closely with God, about hearing his voice, about persevering when it feels tough, and the impacts that our radical obedience and decisions can have on other people. And our actions do have consequences. So before we all just go quit our jobs and give away all of our money, I thought it'd be really helpful to kind of go through some guidelines that are really useful when we're weighing up whether or not we've heard things from God. So there is a little slide on here. They're fairly self-explanatory, but I'll go through each of them one by one as well. So that first one is, does it align with Scripture? So does it align with what the Bible says? So we've got a few sub-notes there. So does it build up God's kingdom? There's a quote that I read from a commentary on Hebrews 11, and it says this: every example in this chapter is about someone who made decisions, acted, and took the consequences of their decision and action because they chose to believe what God had promised about their future. They believed in a fulfillment that was heavenly rather than earthly. So sometimes the things that we do as Christians don't make sense to the rest of the world because we aren't trying to build up our earthly possessions or meet standards that are set by wider society. Instead, we may be doing things that build up the kingdom of God. And if you want to read a little bit more about that, the chapter Matthew in the New Testament is a really good place to start. So that's the first sub-point. The second one is, does it align with the promises of God that we read about in the Bible? So a few weeks ago, Renee did a talk on the promises of God, so you might want to listen back to that one if you haven't heard it already. And the third point is, does it match up with the character of God that we read about in Scripture as well? So some examples there of mercy, holiness, and justice. The second point is a bit of a self-awareness check of your motivations behind doing it. What are your reasons? Is it about self-gain? Is it maybe a selfish act? And that's a really good one if you're in a position of leadership as well, a good sense check before you embark on things. The third one is, does it honour others? We're all made in the image of God, so would these actions honour God's creation? The fourth one, weigh it up with other trusted people. I know that whenever I'm making like really big decisions, things like career moves, all that kind of stuff, I always pray about it with other people and get their views as well. And the fifth one, is it an unshakable idea that sticks around? And I threw this one in there for those people who are maybe prone to a spontaneous action, maybe a kind of person who acts on impulse quite a lot. And that's quite a good one to see if it sticks around as well. So hopefully these guidelines will be a kind of good sense check for you before you embark on some big adventures. But it's also quite helpful where if you're maybe in the midst of an adventure and things are feeling a little bit uncertain, it's a good thing to go back to the reasons why you're doing it and maybe think, oh yeah, this is building up God's kingdom. This is honouring other people and building other people up as well. So that brings us to the end of this talk, and I've rattled on for a little while, so we'll keep this fairly short and sweet, but I thought it would be really good if we do that thing that I spoke about earlier of just sharing some stories where people have maybe journeyed through some uncertainty and really seen God in it and have some really great stories to share. I know there will be some across the room. So if we want to get into kind of threes and fours and do that for a few minutes, that would be amazing. And then maybe if you don't have a story, that's absolutely fine as well. Don't feel pressured to share anything. But also whilst you're in those threes and fours, if there are any people who are kind of experiencing some uncertainty, maybe going through something like that, it would be really great to pray for those people as well. So we're going to do that for about 5 minutes. So you feel free to move your chairs around and stuff so you can chat to other people, and then I'll hand back over to Jemima at the end.